I used to believe that Mass Effect 1 was a good game, albeit the janky slog you put up with, to reach the majesty of Mass Effect 2's greatness. These days, it's my favourite entry in the trilogy. It absolutely is an experience that shows its age, regardless of if you play the original version or the remaster, but I find it to be the truest to what makes Mass Effect stand apart from other fictional universes. It's an experience about wonder and cosmic horror in equal measure, a blend between rich atmospheric world building and facing an existential threat beyond our comprehension. Pairing that warm fuzzy feeling of being at the cultural heart of galactic society, with an onslaught of barren, silent worlds married to alien skies. Mass Effect 1 is a game I frequently find myself returning to, because while it's the oldest, the jankiest, has the stiffest gameplay and a criminal amount of environmental reuse, I think it's also one of the greatest examples of world-building gaming has ever given us. It's a game dancing around profound, unavoidable technical limitations, managing to accomplish its vision in providing us a fully lived-in universe, rich in lore and atmosphere, packed to the brim with a sense of adventure any spacefaring game should strive for. A few years ago, I did a pretty big video on the Mass Effect Trilogy, an all-in-one sort of deal, but I'm going to be honest, it amounted more to a recap than anything profound. And ever since, I've been reluctant to provide a genuine critical analysis, if you can even call my content styled that. So I thought, sod it, one encompassing video for each of the 3 Mass Effect games, bringing it in line with my personal satisfaction if nothing else, couldn't possibly hurt. So, today, we dive into the first of those 3 videos, on Mass Effect 1, the title that kick-started it all, a game that's become something of a source of comfort for me. An adventure I've been on more times than I care to count and will likely experience many times more before I die. I love this game. Hopefully, if nothing else, while I dissect it, that will be obvious. But it was never an exemplar of perfection either. So in today's video, I hope to encompass the good, the bad, and ultimately identify what exactly makes Mass Effect 1 so special, so legendary. So grab your snacks, drinks, your emotional support hand grenade, and let's dive in. A good place to begin with Mass Effect as the first entry in this trilogy is to highlight how it draws you in. The game does begin with a character customization element that is worthwhile, but the actual customization part of that is a bit weird if you choose a male Shepard. You either have a default appearance, or you can customize Shepard's appearance from a default that is not that. And there are 2 possibilities if you do customize Shepard. You either end up with a generic NPC or an abomination. So there's certainly a bias to sticking to the uncustomizable default, particularly in YouTube content about the game that I'm sorry, I kind of have to conform to. Male Shepard either looks like this, or he looks like a throwaway character that might look f***ed when you import it into Mass Effect 2, and that's provided you don't give up and create a genetic masterpiece. Sticking with the default, therefore, is an insurance policy. It's insulation from a nasty surprise in the event that you actually want to take the game seriously. I hear the experience is a bit more forgiving if you choose female Shepard, but let's move on. Next, we have to name Shepard. Naming Shepard is a forename that will never get used. It is the most redundant bit of information you provide Shepard with. So it's weird that there's a rather strict character limit that prevents me from naming him White Monster, but regardless of how pointless deviating from using the default of John is, I still find myself agonizing over what to call him for about an hour. So my first lesson from Mass Effect 1 is I would fail in my first job as a father because I am terrible at coming up with names. Sod it, Michael. Then we get to choose the origin and reputation. Your origin choice dictates your Shepard's upbringing, and you can choose between 3 presets. If you choose Spacer, you are raised by your loving parents across various spaceships in their service to the Alliance. If you choose Colonist, you're raised on a colony until disaster struck. And should you choose Earthborn, you grew up in the slums of Earth, a street orphan, running with criminal gangs until leaving that life behind. As you can imagine, one exists to justify Paragon, one exists to justify Renegade, and the other can go either way.
And Paragon and Renegade are the functional ends of a spectrum in a morality/character system that rewards you primarily for being consistent. These origins don't marry you to a pathway, but they make the most sense for a pathway. Then you have your reputation, which does the same. You have the sole survivor, the war hero, and Ruthless. These are pretty self-explanatory. Ruthless portrays you as a renegade, war hero portrays you as a Paragon hero, and Soul Survivor, again, could in theory go either way. The whole purpose is so that at the beginning of the game, Shepard is not a blank slate. We have an origin point and a character-defining event that is brought up an interesting amount of times, actually. For the most part, it does not massively transform the experience, but it does give us a foundation upon which to build this character. More than anything, it's making room for the morality system these three games are built on. With that in mind, Michael Shepard is pretty vanilla. You choose your class here too, but I'll talk about that in gameplay. As for how the plot begins, we are treated to a text exposition dump, a crawl of information inspired by the likes of Top Gun, outlining humanity's infancy in galactic society. Primarily the discovery of the foundation of spacefaring technology, Mass Effect. The game begins in the year 2183, only a few short decades after humanity discovered they weren't alone in the universe, and that's an interesting dynamic for what is functionally a space opera, as we aren't immediately removed from the humanity we can relate to. Instead, we're witnessing the transition into galactic society. Humanity has the technology, they're physically there, but they're still finding their footing among far more established races, picking up the pieces of a less than smooth introduction. The last thing you want is for humanity to be newcomers on the galactic scene, yet immediately blend with a cosmopolitan utopia. It isn't realistic. We're tribal creatures, distrustful of outsiders. I couldn't name a bigger outsider than aliens. Mass Effect understands this. As such, the mutual wariness between humans and every other species is outlined early. It's fed to us through snippets of lore, learning about the scuffle between humans and Turians during First Contact, for instance. And we're also fed a mini-mystery, as our opening mission aboard the state-of-the-art spaceship, the SSV Normandy, is a simple shakedown run to Eden Prime, yet we have a Turian Spectre aboard, who reiterates the general alien attitude towards humans, and Captain Anderson is in charge. A man the game informs us is typically echelons above this kind of mission. As it turns out, the true nature of the mission is something more. We're going to Eden Prime to retrieve a Prothean artifact, a remnant of a civilization that mysteriously vanished 50,000 years ago, and we're doing so in collaboration with the Council, who have sent a Spectre to oversee the mission, as a diplomatic demonstration of good faith as humans persist to bid to prove themselves worthy of respect in the galaxy. The Prothean artifact is granted importance through the confirmation it's Prothean technology upon which all spacefaring civilizations rely, and that if anything makes their mysterious vanishing 50 millennia ago all the more fascinating, especially considering their supposed lingering impact on the very function of the galaxy. It makes sense why this mystery is such a high priority. On top of that, our opening is an opportunity. Nihilus isn't just here as part of the Human-Turian and furthermore Human Council collaboration. He's here as a Spectre to observe us, in hopes that we possess the qualities necessary to join the Spectre's ranks. It's a chance for humanity through Shepard to prove themselves, become an arm of the Council, of Citadel space. The opening from a distance is a 10-minute long conversation, but that only disguises the fast-paced nature with which Mass Effect 1 feeds us world building, feeds us lore, information about this universe. Before we've seen any of it, we learn a lot about how the characters within the universe view it. And that's an important distinction to make because it will ultimately be up to us to unravel the universe properly and understand it for ourselves. The opening is very dialogue heavy, so it's understandable that pretty early many players will bounce off it. But it outlines humanity's place in the galaxy, humanity's ambitions within galactic society, and where Commander Shepard, and by extension the player, fit into that. But of course it wouldn't be the opening of a plot if it didn't all go horribly wrong. We're informed galactic society extends beyond the Citadel's influence, and as such there are other powers who would love to get their grubby tentacles all over this Prothean beacon. Sure enough, the pilot Joker alerts us to a situation on our destination Eden Prime. They're under attack by an unknown force. Completely overwhelmed, So it looks like to retrieve the beacon, we'll have a fight on our hands. The clip ends with the horrifying visage of a monster of a ship, making an ungodly noise. It's unclear who or what this assailant is. The only thing that's certain is the discovery of a Prothean beacon before this attack cannot be a coincidence. Thus, immediate urgency is injected. We arrive at humanity's oldest, most successful colony, and find it in the process of being decimated. Nihilus sods off immediately, so much for evaluating us, leaving Commander Shepard, Kaidan Alenko, and a fella named Jenkins, the Mass Effect Trilogy's greatest he's dead, to fight through the invading force and secure the beacon. I don't think Medigel's gonna help here, mate. As we find ourselves battling drones, we're soaking in the atmosphere of Eden Prime. I actually think in the remastered this took a hit. In the original version, the sky was a deep red hue. It represented just how desperately wrong things were. Now it just kind of looks like a bog-standard summer's evening. Nevertheless, the sound design and the layering of encounters from Geth drones to actual Geth, who don't typically leave their portion of space, contributes to the building mystery. Why are they attacking a human colony? It's obvious that whatever purpose this attack serves, it's greater than just Eden Prime. Much like our mission here is about so much more than just the colony. The mystery of this attack is drip-fed to us through dialogue conversations. Firstly, through Ashley Williams, Jenkins' replacement, and then after fighting past zombified people, we bump into a couple of scientists hiding in a cabin, one of whom appears to be having an existential crisis on behalf of the entirety of humanity. The scientists tell us about a Turian among the Geth. It can't have been Nihilus because he was with us when the attack started. Then, shortly after, we get momentarily removed from Shepard's perspective. Nihilus recognizes the Turian, though he doesn't realize the threat he poses. He calls him Saren, and in the realm of villain design, Saren's really cool. He has a menacing, intimidating presence exemplified by the music that plays whenever he's on screen. The Turian trademark flange in his voice gives his words volume.
I wasn't expecting to find the Geth here. The situation's bad.
Don't worry. I've got it under control.
Nevertheless, from this image you can tell he's different from other Turians. The contrast between Nihilus's aesthetic and his is potent. Saren's look is paler. He has cybernetic implants all over his body, and this gives him distinction from Turians, which is important. He's more than just an example of a Turian. That sounds like an inefficient waste of words, and the inefficient part at least might be true, but a big theme of Mass Effect 1 is space racism. Aliens have prejudices against humans and vice versa. Him being an alien antagonist is a bit on the nose, thematically pulling in a negative direction. We're shown this scene so Saren can be distinguished from what his species actually look like, to point out that he is unique. The importance of that, of course, is there's more to him than just being a continuation of complex human-Turian relations as already outlined. There's no better way to demonstrate Saren is serving a different end than watching him murder his kinsman in cold blood. That being said, it's too early in the plot to discern what his motivations actually are, but I'd wager it has something to do with that Goliath of a ship that we can see taking off as we approach the landing where Nihilus's corpse can be found. And what a little detail that is. The ship that looks a bit like a crayfish, despite obviously being miles away, still looks gigantic, dwarfing any towers nearby, letting off a dark red smoke as it rises to the heavens. How does a thing like that even get off the ground? For a game released in 2007 contending with all kinds of technical limitations, Mass Effect has an immense portrayal of scale. The emphasis on the big ship most certainly means it'll be relevant later, but for now we have bigger issues. Nihilus is dead, and a witness to his murder tells us about Saren, which is fair enough. If you're going to do a mystery, deviating from the primary perspective is risky. So, bringing it back in line with the primary perspective by informing the main protagonist about an event the observer witnesses that doesn't involve them is a great way to ensure we aren't armed with knowledge that Shepard doesn't have. In this context, nothing would annoy me more than knowing more than the characters do. I mean, I can't avoid that at this point, it's my nth playthrough, but in spirit, if the viewer, player, observer, depending on the form of media we're talking about, is to be privy to information the main protagonist and other protagonists don't possess, that can't be the case for long. That's important, it's a demonstration of narrative focus. And that is the contribution of the dock worker who may or may not be a smuggler. From this point, all we have to do is fight through some more Geth and try and catch up with Big Saz, while simultaneously preventing the Geth from blowing up the area around the beacon itself. In succeeding, Shepard interacts with the beacon. It gives him strange, indecipherable visions before exploding and knocking him out, waking up on the Normandy sometime later to make sense of the whole thing. The visions play back into the Prothean mystery. Saren obviously has an interest in that too. The Geth venturing beyond the Veil was unprecedented, never mind to attack a human colony and that massive ship all leave burning questions. As for the death of Jenkins and Nihilus and the destruction of the Prothean beacon, it's fair to say the mission appears to have failed. A kick to the teeth of the plucky humans. It's unlikely the Council will want to appoint a bottle job to the Spectres, and that means humanity's progress in deepening positive relations has halted, and that is no doubt a problem we are going to have to resolve. As for Saren, Anderson fills us in on who he is. One of the best Spectres the Council has. It's going to be very difficult for a human's words to sway their opinion on him, especially when a lot of aliens think humanity is growing too fast. The only evidence we have against the guy is the fact that Shepard had a vision, and the hearsay of a dock worker, of course. In short, we've got our bloody work cut out for us. Nonetheless, we make for the Citadel, which is where the game won me over. The Normandy's arrival at the Citadel for the first time is where this game goes from interesting to utterly enthralling. Situated in a cloud of pink known as the Serpent Nebula sits a giant space station. So massive in fact that it's not just a space station, it's a megacity. The capital of Citadel space, the seat of the Council. It is a visual feast. The crew look on in amazement along with the player at the sheer scale of the thing and the mass of ships that surround it. It's a mesmerizing detachment from the fringe of civilization. Now we're at its beating heart. For there to be a great galaxy, there needs to be an equally great core. The Citadel functions as the Mass Effect universe's core, a layered space station city where the world building is at its most potent, also serving as something the player cannot see in the real world. After all, that is the base essence of sci-fi, and fantasy while we're at it. Eden Prime is very Earth-like, it doesn't convey this same feeling, and being on a spaceship is like being indoors. It's fancy, but again, the Citadel is the first fundamentally impressive sight Mass Effect 1, and by extension the Mass Effect universe, throws at us. Before we were dealing with mostly humans, one Turian, another Turian, and a bunch of robots. Now we're in a cultural melting pot of various species, and provided the player meets the game halfway, it's more than willing to go out of its own way to ensure we understand that each species is unique, beholden to their own cultures and customs, mannerisms and sensibilities. The idea of exploring the Citadel presents an inherent wealth of possibility. This is a civilization that transcends humanity. It's a touch anthropomorphic overall, which can be forgiven given the entire consumer base of this game is human, unless you've been teaching your dog how to game, in which case I salute you. The Citadel is a wonder because it's a well-oiled machine. As much as it's aesthetically pleasant, it's rendered believable through the complexity of its function. So while our arrival here is a moment of genuine, gobsmacking impact, once that novelty fades, we need to feel as if it's just another Tuesday. Fortunately, nothing screams Tuesday quite like bureaucracy. Remember, we were on a mission partially on behalf of the Council to secure the Prothean beacon that exploded, and the Turian Spectre that came with us is dead. Commander Shepard is the natural scapegoat, and that falls in line with the status quo of the galaxy. We have no evidence against Saren, whose hatred for humans is palpable, and the Council have no grounds aside from human accusations to suspect their top agent of any wrongdoing. Only the testimony of a traumatized dock worker. Anderson's personal history with Saren also doesn't help, but long story short, we've raced here with urgent news and all we're getting in return is governmental inefficiency. In order to go and stop Saren, we first need to find evidence against him. There's a great commentary at play here. Politics can push pressing matters down the priority list, We know for a fact Saren is up to dodgy stuff. We have our man. But understandably, before we can have a crack at him, we need to demonstrate to the powers that be that we need to. This is important on 2 counts. Firstly, that is kind of how it works in general, and secondly, because there's a massive power imbalance between Commander Shepard, a human soldier, and Saren, a Turian, the Spectre's top agent, the Council's right hand. Unless the evidence against him is irrefutable, it's far too inconvenient to entertain the idea that he's gone rogue. In short, why would they believe us over him? And since so far all the harm he's done has been to a human colony on Eden Prime, considering the already clearly outlined broader galactic temperature towards humanity, that within itself may very well be something the Council is willing to overlook. Humans have their own ideas, they aren't always willing to play ball and cooperate. They're viewed as an aggressive expansionist bully, and they're known for looking out for their own first. They haven't entirely acclimatized to being part of something greater yet. What makes that so interesting is that perception is not entirely false. It is not unreasonable for the alien species to be cautious of humanity's brashness. It isn't exactly meant to feel fair, but it is not as unfair as it seems either. That's another area where Mass Effect stands out to me. Like I said earlier, humans are finding their place in the galaxy. Nobody's gonna hand it to them. They've got to find what they can offer that the Citadel races cannot. The Asari bring diplomacy, the Turians bring a massive military force, and the Solarians bring intelligence and science. With those critical areas covered, there's little to offer, and I don't think Jesus is going to cut it. Saren becomes both an obstacle and objective. If our personified stand-in for the entire human race in Commander Shepard wants to prove the value of an entire species, this is our opportunity. So off we trot to do that, but naturally we can't do it alone. We need to pick up some allies, though the game doesn't necessarily frame it that way explicitly, and once again the Citadel proves itself to be a stunning backdrop. The beating heart of galactic society reflects the rest of it. There's a flavour and a friend for everyone here, and Mass Effect doesn't homogenize its race's perspectives into hive-minded cultures, though doing so can be very seductive and an easy trap to fall into. Saren's disdain for humanity might be palpable, but despite the checkered history, not all Turians share his views. Some are indifferent towards us for other reasons, but take Garrus Vakarian for instance, a Turian hell-bent on the idea that Saren is the bad guy. He was the C-Sec officer in charge of the investigation into Saren, and is committed to getting his man. He doesn't mindlessly believe the humans are wrong and Saren is right, quite the opposite. Considering we meet him before our first interaction with the Council, it establishes a precedent early that, even though aliens look different to humans, they're all individuals. In Garrus's case, it scores us an easy ally. There's also the Krogan mercenary, Rex, or as I like to call him, the angriest tortoise I've ever seen. He wants us to help him out with his contract, which just so happens to be in the direction we're going to be going anyway, in our own investigations into Saren, and he commits to join us thereafter for the challenge. The best way I can explain why that's the case is because the Krogan are culturally Millwall supporters. They love a scrap. His main reason for joining, of course, is because the plot needs him to, and if he wasn't such a fascinating character, that would be a problem. So together with my new alien friends, we take on Fist, the proprietor of Cora's Den, who tells us where we can find a Quarian who has found evidence against Saren. So we find her, and would you look at that? Evidence. She explains that she's on a pilgrimage and found a recording of Saren on the memory core of a Geth.
Eden Prime was a major victory. The beacon has brought us one step closer to finding the Conduit.
And one step closer to the return of the Reapers.
So, thanks to Tally's diligence, our ragtag crew gains another member. All of the new recruits are alien, and there's a point in there. The narrative might be deeply embedded in the idea of human exceptionalism, but there's also an air of cooperation and collaboration. Standing alone is not as fun as having allies. That's important because Mass Effect is pushing this commentary in both directions. Humanity are proving their worth to the galaxy, but at the same time, there's an emphasis on improving adaptability, working together with the other races. After all, the very human us against the world mentality might score us some colonies and greatly simplify things, but it won't endear us to our extraterrestrial peers. This story is about earning our place, but that journey is just as much introspective as it is based on action. So the Citadel, as a sample of what we're becoming a part of, has to function as a motivating factor in that mission. The newfound friends we make are just the tip of the iceberg of the vibes we get from the place. We're trawling through the Citadel, the Presidium and wards, to find evidence against Saren, but we're also building a deeper connection with the Mass Effect universe. It isn't a place that innately hates us or makes us feel unwelcome, quite the opposite. There are a whole range of views of humans here. For everyone who harbours bitterness towards us, there's somebody welcoming, willing to tell us more about them, their species, their cultures. One way or another, we can find out the information our curiosity pushes us towards. An early favourite of mine were the Elcor, a species of massive, slow, heavy beasts who communicate through ways so subtle that in order to speak with anyone who is not of their kind, they have to declare their tone before monotonously continuing. That way, their meaning can be more elaborately understood. What a marvellous concept for an autism creature. Furthermore, our exploration not only rewards us with understanding more about the species we can meet, but understanding their place in the galactic hierarchy. Not every race here is represented on the Council. Some just have embassies and aren't viewed as capable enough to become full-fledged Council races. For instance, the Volus. Nobody knows what a Volus actually looks like. All we know is they're built like space hoppers and have to wear high-pressure suits, otherwise they might decompress and presumably die. As for the Hanar, they are basically jellyfish. There's such an evolutionary vastness to Mass Effect's alien races that it's only natural any form of political union between them results in a less than equal political structure. Humans aren't the only ones who want a greater say here. They're the newest species to Citadel space, yet from the perspective of the Council they're more physiologically conventional. So while the Council does not see them as an equal yet, they are simultaneously being granted favour over the likes of the Volus, the Elcor, the Hanar, whom the Council clearly view legally as a lesser species. Avena, the Presidium VI Guide, is a great betrayal of those biases. We aren't the only targets of the Council's condescension. We are simply the most likely to defy it, creating social waves both above and below us. Our experiences on the Citadel can really delve into that complexity. We aren't special merely because we aren't being granted the equality that comes with a seat on the Council. We're special because we're new and haven't got a clear role in this hierarchy at all yet. Every other species, both Council and otherwise, from a general perspective, occupy a contributing function. The Asari are the diplomats and mediators, the very glue of discussion in the political structure. The Solarians prioritize intelligence and research, and the Turians are the military power. Humans discovered that in the First Contact War. Away from the Council races, the Volus function as the financiers and traders. The Elcor are slow and deliberate. Every action is conservatively considered, and that makes them unrivaled in planning. As with the Hanar, not to be confused with diplomacy, they're really good at fostering relationships. They are deeply enigmatic, yet very polite. Being an aquatic species, they're also great navigators of marine environments. Every Citadel race brings something to the table, while also having areas they rely on the others for. That is where it's apparent humanity stands out. Humanity's natural tendency to distrust outsiders means they're adept and self-sufficient in most areas, especially those that matter. This is because the other societies we observe snippets of have rigid structure that help box individual members of that race into the role that best suits the Council. The Turians being a military species means every Turian is a soldier. They will always have a more powerful military than humans. As far as the big picture is concerned, there's always somebody on the galactic scene who can outclass us. Our advantage is more microscopic. The individual. The best human soldier would have an advantage over the best Turian soldier, and the only reason for that is because the human soldier has a greater likelihood of actually wanting to be there. There's no mandate that necessitates every human serve. The ass-kicking element might still go either way, but the point is there's a malleability and adaptability to humans that within itself is unrivaled. Provided the individual has the desire, grit and dedication to do it, they can excel not because they were predetermined to, but because they chose that path. So as a species, we'll never be superior to the Asari, the Turians, the Solarians in their specialized areas, but the base will be covered with expertise at the individual level. That malleability makes us hard to put into a box. box, hard to determine, hard to quantify, rendering us a worthwhile ally, yet unpredictable. So the Council keeps us close enough because too much distance is dangerous, and also at arm's length to keep that ambition in check. Because the Council races are learning that humans pursue what they want and don't easily give up. And that's ultimately the distinction between humans and the non-Council races. The others have been around for a bit, they've slotted into roles. They are waiting with varying degrees of patience for an artificial ascension to prominence, while the new kids are actively pursuing it. To cut a long story short, the arrival of the Homo sapiens has completely reshuffled the accepted norm of galactic politics. The Citadel exists to put us in close quarters with said politics, while also showcasing a slice of galactic life that ensures the alien species introduced never necessarily come across impotent, and furthermore we're provided with plenty of opportunity to understand that while their individualism might not exist to the extremes of our own, they are still people with a tapestry of perspectives, which wasn't entirely necessary since that was outlined before we even arrived here by Nihilus. But that's a crucial part of world building, feeding you an idea and letting you see it. There are many ideas touched down upon before landing on Eden Prime that the Citadel comes to reinforce. The Council race's perspective, or broader alien general consensus, and the point of view of us, the pesky humans, not to mention the work both parties have to do to meet halfway somewhere. The Citadel is there to show us this isn't a hostile stalemate. As such, while navigating this slice of a galaxy that doesn't know what to do with us, we can still feel warmly welcome and soak in its magnificence. That in turn renders it motivating for the player. It encourages us to want to find our place, to prove our capability, our reliability, to demonstrate our value. It wants us to feel like we could be at home here, and the place feels increasingly authentic through the complex layering of lore. If we miss key details, we can always fall back on the magnificent, mostly voiced codex. We can be educated on our peers and events in the galaxy, with entries that come thick and fast, particularly when on the Citadel. We can push on and do only the story content here, or we can take our time and get stuck into activities aiding people, both human and non-human, in their troubles, under the premise that with every action we learn something new, discovering yet more texture. Rapidly sodding off to save the galaxy feels like it does a disservice to just how impressively meticulous this fictional universe is. The short time frame within which it establishes so many ideas is only part of the equation though, so let's take a minute to talk about design. Mass Effect 1 is originally a 2007 game, remaster or not. The bulk of the experience was built around 2007 limitations. The Citadel is built in such a way that it has to represent something much bigger than it can actually be as a playable space, so it has to be conservative with just how much area it dedicates to everything it wants us to be able to explore. The Citadel Tower is a small area that represents the seat of government. This is where the Council meet. It's a grand room and you can figure there are various areas around it that we can't actually access. While we're dealing with the representatives of the Council in there, you can fathom there are entire wings full of staff supporting this hierarchy. After all, it's hard to imagine that one individual could accurately represent an entire species on their own, but its greatest value is its layout is foreshadowing. As for the Presidium, this is where things get more interesting. It's a compact space again, dotted mostly with huddles of NPCs, but its true benefit comes from looking up, where it's made distinctly clear we aren't on a planet. There's a nice artificial sky and we can witness sky cars curving up around the ring, the very centre of the Citadel as seen from the Normandy. It's clean and bright and makes sense that it's the space station's prime real estate. It has water and foliage to beautify it further. It's clear this is where the dignitaries pass through on their visits to the Citadel. It's airy and pleasant, and the people we meet here are generally speaking of the elite. Then, a short couple elevator rides away, we have the wards. That, by relation to the Presidium, feels like it's the interior of a large building, much like the other large buildings you can see on the wings of the Citadel out the window. The views allow us to picture that the population density here must rival Earth's most densely populated cities, so we get to see a lot of it while only being able to explore a minuscule chunk. A chunk that consists of a market, a bar, a casino, a police station, and a medical clinic. Life here is more varied and less sanitized. What goes on here depends more on who we're dealing with, to a greater degree considering anyone can access it. The grit does not translate the best, it pales in comparison to Mass Effect 2's take on grit, but it certainly isn't as airy as the Presidium and feels more like we're on a space station where people happen to live. It has an almost Star Warsy finish, no doubt in part due to BioWare's KOTOR pedigree, where it bears a fantastical facade, full of cracks for the highly flawed world to seep through. Then there's the rich synthy score. The fantastic music that dominates the audioscape helps top off the atmosphere. Even this area's disguised loading screens contribute. For instance, the lifts. Either your squad mates will have a conversation, or you'll overhear a news report. It can reference things you've done personally, reference events that happened a while back, events that are occurring elsewhere in the galaxy, or simply function as a method through which the game tells a joke. Even the rapid transit loading screens give us something to look at. There is an abundantly clear, conscious effort to ensure the immersion is not broken even for a second. I wouldn't go so far as to say it has a 100% success rate. There are certain lapses in logic, like supposedly the Citadel has a very high population density, yet there are certain spaces that do seem wasted. For instance, this corridor with nothing in it. Surely just put some dud doors on one side that tell us they lead somewhere, just nowhere we need to go. And then there's the inexplicable cube in CSEC. I gather it's cut content, maybe even an augmented reality training arena, but it's just a cube. It's never really addressed why this cube sits in Citadel traffic control. It's just kind of there. Fortunately though, the vast majority of the time the Citadel functions as a very tight environment. But I'm sure you're just about fed up with me talking about it at this stage, but it is such a massive part of Mass Effect 1 that it justified such a tangent. Of course, with the evidence gathered that Saren is a naughty boy, the Council are happy to expel him from the Spectres and seem curious about these Reapers he's hankering for the return of. Early, we understand they are supposedly an ancient race of sentient machines that disappeared around the time of the Protheans, and that's more sinister and interesting than Saren being bad simply because he's a rotten guy, as Anderson makes it seem. We may have successfully investigated Saren, but there's more that needs to be done. His ally, Matriarch Benezia, as heard in the audio recording. And of course, these mysterious Reapers that are supposedly returning. What are they? And how will they supposedly wipe out all life in the galaxy? What's clear is somebody needs to go after Saren and get to the bottom of this, and sending a fleet into the Terminus systems would no doubt start a war. But what about a Spectre? After all, there is a vacancy. So with a bit of convincing, the Council make Commander Shepard the first human Spectre. A great honour for humanity, and what we've been after. Before we're released on the galaxy to bring Saren to his knees, we have already made history within the Mass Effect universe. This can feel a tad unearned, as all we've done is crack a few skulls in the wards and track down a marginalised alien who'd already done the hard bit, and I won't defend that as much as point out the consolation is the old stakes are making way for new ones that are much, much higher. Because Saren is looking to bring back a race of ancient sentient machines with the mandate of routinely destroying organic life. The opportunity of becoming a Spectre may be realised, but now there's every chance we've got to prove humanity can be a superpower by saving the galaxy. So Captain Anderson cedes command over the Normandy to us, and we're finally released upon the galaxy, with our good old Normandy crew and newfound alien entourage. Now we take to the skies and hopefully remember there's a main story at some point. Okay, you're probably thinking, what are you on about? It is an objective truth that Mass Effect 1's story is not a long experience, and from a certain point of view, the gameplay and side content does leave a lot to be desired. While there are highly common gripes with both the gameplay and side content that I view as absolutely valid, I also think there's something to be said for the substance of what's going on to still diligently be serving purpose. First and foremost, let's get the recruitment of Liara out the way so we have a complete squad. We go to the planet Therum and recruit an Asari archaeologist specializing in the Protheans named Liara Tassoni, the daughter of matriarch Benezia. I never promised that within itself would be especially thought-provoking. We contend with some Geth forces, and hoof it out of there with the Asari in tow, bringing down ancient Prothean ruins in the process. You know, just casually demolishing an ancient structure so old, it makes Stonehenge look like temporary scaffolding. With that done, we now have the full set. The two humans, Caden and Ashley, Tali, Garrus, Rex, and Liara. And if you think learning about these races ends with the Citadel, wrong. Our alien squad mates are the best windows into these alien cultures that we're going to get. Furthermore, they are 75% fascinating characters in their own right. It's important too, over the course of the main story and all the side content, that you take the time to explore the hub area of the Normandy and socialise with your squad members. It's in doing this that we will learn more about them, and that is perhaps most important with the likes of Tali and Rex, the Quarian and the Krogan, the two species we don't see an awful lot of on the Citadel. The reason for this is because they are the most generally stigmatized species. The Krogan for the Krogan rebellions, which ended with a genetically engineered virus infecting all Krogan that renders their birth rates incredibly low. They are practically walking tanks and typically demonstrate the aggression to match it, so for most Krogan we meet, we promptly shoot them in the face. But there's more to learn about them than just that, and Rex is the only one willing to tell us anything. Most notably, the Krogan are the victims of a council-sanctioned genocide, and the future of their species as a result is so doomed, many of them turn their back on their homeworld and ply their trade the best way they know how, as warriors, mercenaries for hire. Having no greater good to aspire to, they are cynical. They'll fight for whoever's paying best, transforming the broader stigma around the Krogan into a self-fulfilling prophecy. Rex might possess that very gruff, intimidating, battle-hardened exterior, and a personality forged from centuries of cynicism, yet somewhere under that tough, terrifying shell is a highly intelligent individual who displays signs of having a moral code. Considering how nihilistic the existence of a Krogan must be at this point, that's a fantastic platform for character development. What impression can we make on this jaded mercenary? As for Tali, the most telling interaction is through Engineer Adams, who notes that she is impressively inquisitive, so she's a likeable sort who makes a positive impression on the crew, but the Quarians too are stigmatized in Citadel space. They're a nomadic people, they don't have a homeworld anymore, they lost that homeworld when their AI creations, the Geth, rebelled. Since then, artificial intelligence became illegal in Citadel space. No doubt the two events are connected. So the Quarians are the ultimate reason the Geth exist, which isn't going to make people view them positively, and on top of that, they are migrants with no fixed home. We learn through Tali that she's young, on her pilgrimage, a rite of passage into adulthood, where a Quarian strikes out on their own, to explore and understand the galaxy better, bringing something of value back to the migrant fleet as a gift to the captain of the ship they then join. We also learn the reason why she wears a suit at all times, because the Quarians have spent so much time aboard sanitized ships. Their immune systems have paid the price over the centuries, so while Tali can breathe without the mask, the chances that she would become infected with something are very high. This also creates a slight air of mystery around Tali, as we cannot properly see her face. We can discern the odd detail, but otherwise her visor shrouds it. While we're at it, I'm quite certain she's the only Quarian we can actually meet at all in Mass Effect 1, meaning every detail we can learn about the Quarians in this game comes from her, so it's amazing how fleshed out our understanding of them can become from her alone. Garrus's dynamic is less about his species. He's a Turian, so we can learn plenty about Turians without consulting him directly. All of our dialogue around Garrus is tailored towards tapping into his history as a cop, and how so far that's formed his bespoke personality. From this we can discern his reasons for quitting C-Sec and joining us on a cruise across the galaxy to slap up his kinsman, and that's an opportunity for Commander Shepard to influence him. More than an example of a Turian to probe for knowledge, his role in relation to Commander Shepard is that of a protege. There's no doubt he's a competent if not highly skilled soldier. But he's swept up in the idea of the mission. It's up to us to either stoke that fire or rein him in. His morality is heavily influenced by Shepard's own. After all, the morality system this game has is heavily decided by the dialogue. So that means if you're playing a renegade Shepard, making renegade choices in dialogue will contribute towards building that renegade graph, meaning you unlock pivotal renegade skill checks encouraging you to enable Garrus's renegade proclivities. Whereas if you're playing Paragon for much the same reason, you're going to work to disarm them. So Garrus in a virtually binary way can be heavily influenced by the player's own choices. Beyond that, in later entries he slots into a best pal role, which makes him an incredibly fun squad mate to roll with, but Mass Effect 1 is more about the foundation of the character. Glimmers of later Garrus do shine through, but his evolution into possibly one of the best characters in the franchise doesn't start to see yield until Mass Effect 2. That's not to say he's not interesting here, it's quite the opposite. Teaching this hot-headed cop about the impact of decisions and the consequences of one's actions, or inversely nurturing his ruthless streak, is a long-term investment moulding him into Commander Shepard's ultimate wingman. We get to bond with him in phases, and Mass Effect 1 is simply the first phase. Now, there is value in Liara, but again, she functions almost similarly to Garrus, except she doesn't have as interesting a lived experience so far. She's a socially awkward archaeologist, whose development in the first game is pretty flat, and then in Mass Effect 2, she's just a different character. This Liara we see before us doesn't bloom, she just becomes somebody else altogether, it's insane. Her function is to primarily help Shepard unravel his visions by using some Asari mind-melding technique, and binding her understanding of the Protheans to what Shepard saw when interacting with the beacon. I wish I could say that felt as helpful as it was intended to come across. She is somewhat insightful into the workings of the monogender Asari, but otherwise I can't help but feel, considering how flirtatious Shepard's dialogue with Liara is, her other chief function is the romance contest for Ashley, or indeed Kaidan. And, being an alien, she often comes out on top, and the odd bit of Asari lore we can pluck from her is just secondary, as is the fact we're on a mission to kill her mum. But despite her general dullness, she has two things going for her. If you seek her out for conversation, she does contribute to the world building. Second, tentacles. Apparently that's enough for some people. Liara fortunately gets much more interesting as a character in the sequels too, but here she's one of the steadier squad mates. There isn't a lot to build with her. Perhaps more than anything to do with Liara herself, it's most apparent in these conversations that Mass Effect 1's dialogue can be a bit funny. It is a 2007 game, dialogue can be an information exchange at times, so the game doesn't exactly bid to explore how far it can push the dialogue, maybe try and incorporate characteristics you'd expect from real conversations, which tend to flow entirely differently to dramatized ones. So maybe Liara's issue isn't her characterization, but the fact the bottle that characterization is in doesn't really get uncorked. While Garrus's mentality is explored and Rex's cynicism is unraveled, not to mention Tali's journey of finding her own place within the Quarian sphere, Liara has perhaps the greatest emotional motivator. She's just a bit too steady for that to feel genuine. Then there are the human characters whom are easiest to dismiss. Kaidan dealt with his baggage a long time ago. As a result, he doesn't really have an arc, he's just a steadfast operative. He has interesting backstory, there's no denying that, so, like the other characters, he does contribute to the world building, but there's very little for us to do with it. He's a likeable and reserved member of the team, but when it comes to a dilemma faced later in the plot, this guy's too easy to hand the short end of the stick. Then there's Ashley, dubbed the space racist. She isn't very trusting of our new alien companions, and takes a particular disliking to Liara to both reinforce this, and force a love triangle dilemma if you're playing as male Shepard. But that deep character flaw is an interesting trait to explore, because it hasn't manifested from nowhere, and while the game spends plenty of time fixating on alien attitudes towards humans, it also doesn't neglect the reverse fixture. Humans have xenophobic attitudes too, and Ashley's doesn't manifest in any way that would be malicious, it's merely passing distrust. Her grandfather fought in the First Contact War, becoming notorious for being the only general to surrender to the Turians, and her career prospects as a result are pretty limited. She has a legacy not to live up to, but to overrule. Sympathizing with the likes of the Turians now is a concept she perceives to have dire consequences, since giving quarter to the aliens has tarnished her family name's reputation. The idea that humanity comes first has simply been extra drilled into her. Now she struggles to fathom that there might be another way. Coming to view any alien as an ally is simply alien, and she makes her concerns known. What this means is Ashley does have a foreseeable arc. Whether or not Mass Effect 2 and 3 bid to realise it is a different question. The reason I've allocated 10 minutes to talking about the squad is because this is the first base for peripheral content. We don't need to get to know our crew, but we choose to. Every exchange almost yields value. We learn yet more about the galaxy we're a part of. That being said, were you to say that Mass Effect 1's character work would be excelled by its successor, I agree with you. When it comes to this stuff, Mass Effect 2 is just different gravy. But it's less of a learning experience there, while here it very much so is. And that extends way beyond the characters themselves here. Another key aspect to Mass Effect's amazing world building happens to be the exploration. It is not an especially renowned area, but I believe it's an area that's often overlooked on account of the game's very obvious technical limitations. How you find the content of Mass Effect is quite straightforward. In simple speak, you use the galaxy map to jump between star systems and have a nosy. Every world in a system can be explored to some extent, even if it's just a wall of text feeding us information. As such, we can find various human colonies and fact files on a variety of other worlds. That makes inspecting each and every one of them an opportunity to learn something new. So even when removed from galactic hubs and not engaging with characters necessarily, every world we can see contributes to the lore one way or another. Some descriptions might cling to the simple facts, but others will provide us with far more thought-out mini-stories, sometimes tapping into humorous avenues, other times seeking to fascinate the player with passing mysteries. I don't know if that's just me, but it's a far more effective method for highlighting just how big space really is, to not be able to land on every rocky planet we see. Some are just there for decoration, and the game meets us halfway on our curiosity. And to break that down, every so often there is a world we can actually land on. Basically, the Normandy swoops into atmosphere and slaps us down in our space car, the Mako, within which we can explore a small area of the surface, allowing us to soak in a variety of environments. I think it's fair to say none of them are going to knock your socks off with detail. They're typically very drab, unchanging spaces with sparse activities, if any. These activities aren't typically groundbreaking, consisting of minor activities, hacking rocks for some reason, and engaging in straightforward side missions across 3 reused interiors. So over the course of an encompassing playthrough, you'll get very familiar with this warehouse layout, this subterranean bunker that some galaxy brain decided to put windows in, and these mine shafts. Yes, the interior reuse for these bits of content can be quite jarring, and if you think driving the Mako across these barren landscapes is a nice thing to break up the monotony of continuously finding yourself in the same space but on a different planet, no. If anything, BioWare deserve a Nobel Peace Prize for their contributions to the field of torture. In the remaster, it's certainly slightly better. Having a boost helps. It gives you a smidgen of torque to scale things. I'm not sure how the thing struggles so much to go vertical on an asteroid, but my gripe with the Mako is it's a very inconsistent beast. It's buoyant unless you need it to be. It's poised unless you need it to be. The camera swivel will alter the input needed for forward motion, but has no say on reversing. And the landscapes don't often give you an option to avoid having to scale a mountain the Mako physically cannot scale in order to get to one of these objectives. Many times you just have to Skyrim horse it and hope for the best. Results doing that can be inconsistent for no discernible reason. The positives, however, of being in a 6-wheeled extraterrestrial world-exploring car is often the skybox. There is a vibe to being in this thing on the moon looking at Earth. This is a view only so many brilliantly minded humans have ever had. Likewise, more alien skies are something to behold. Seeing an unfamiliar celestial object in the sky is priceless, and the isolating feeling of that, considering how barren these landscapes actually are, hits home a real, palpable feeling of loneliness and cosmic insignificance. They may not always make for especially riveting content, but the artistic intent is easy enough to feel. I actually would go so far as to say that within itself is impressive, because when you take into consideration what Mass Effect is about, that very obviously is not done without a purpose. So yes, I accept the argument that they could have done more with these spaces, but I fundamentally disagree with the idea that they are somehow wasted. The content within them could, in many areas, be better, but the evocation of cosmic dread is fantastic. Through that lens too, the content itself is not a massive failure.
It might follow the basic formula of finding a hint on the Citadel and then venturing out into the galaxy to locate the content, or being contacted by Admiral Hackett as you arrive in a system, which happens so often you can't help but wonder if the Alliance is just you. But once you look past the delivery mechanisms, there's some punchy stuff to be enjoyed. A standout is venturing to Luna, the Earth's moon, where in an underground facility a virtual intelligence or VI has gone rogue. Now, in the Mass Effect universe there's a huge distinction between VIs and AIs. VIs, virtual intelligences, are not sentient, whereas AIs are. So to have a VI go rogue is a simple mission, just find the core and unplug the thing. However, when we do this, we get a message pop up on screen. It's nothing fancy. Nevertheless, it entirely transforms the context of what we've just done. We're told a burst of white noise over all frequencies nearly deafens us. Our hardsuit's heads-up display interprets it into a series of zeros and ones, repeating again and again, blanketing all frequencies until the lights on the final VI cluster flicker and die. If you put those numbers, those zeros and ones, into a binary code translator, you end up with a 4-letter word. Help. So this simple mission of unplugging the faulty computer has completely been transformed by the implication that the computer had become sentient and in its confusion had turned on the people it was working for. That is something infinitely more chilling, boosted by the eerie sounds that play in these bunkers, as much as, dare I say, the simple text used to convey these concepts that extend beyond perhaps what the game is capable of showing us. Sometimes it's the not actually seeing these things that makes the experience that little bit weirder. It's like BioWare understood that Mass Effect one day would be massively outdated and leaned hard into conveying the eerie vibes of an older game. That's a kind of atmosphere I can bask in no matter how many times you throw me into a copy-pasted bunker environment. That shopping centre at midnight vibe is so enticing. Other things Mass Effect's content get right includes having content dedicated to your past, your backstory. If you choose the sole survivor reputation, there is a mission dedicated to that, different to the other reputations. If you choose the Earthborn backstory, there's a mission to do with that again is completely unrelated to the mission that might crop up if you chose Spacer or Colonist. There are many missions beyond that that do expand the lore. So while I definitely agree with the idea that the actual content isn't too much to write home about, there is a constant and impressive communication of ideas, and sometimes the idea is enough. The notion of happening upon a drifting spaceship weakened board is so enticing that it doesn't matter if the interior looks like that of a warehouse. We're here to investigate what the bloody hell happened. The actual flow of gameplay becomes entirely secondary to the creation of an atmosphere that spurs you on. However minor, there is always a story being told. Considering they typically require the commander to be locked and loaded, happy endings are rare. The game wants you to sit on the intense loneliness of the galaxy. It's such a dark contrast to the brightness of the Citadel, and the optimism it represents. I love Mass Effect 1's creepy vibe. It's perhaps one of my favourite things about the game. I'm not a big fan of horror, but when ambient horror creeps into things that aren't meant to be horror, I have a tendency to fall in love. So it's no surprise that Mass Effect 1 gelled with me so well on this. I want to say this is something Mass Effect 2 did well as well, but that game has a lot more rhythm to it. I'm not saying Mass Effect 1's layout is difficult to suss, but I am saying the foreboding ambience bonds well
when we aren't experiencing something broken down into easily consumable chunks. There is an element of figuring out your next move, where you're more likely to find yourself allowing the emotions in the game is trying to evoke. That moreish unease, the undertones of almost anxiety, I want to say, is something the first Mass Effect title capitalized on significantly. So it's no surprise the storytelling also leans hard into it, but before we talk any story stuff further at least, I'd very much like the opportunity to address the gameplay. I've already highlighted how the Mako is almost endearingly crap, but it goes without saying that Mass Effect's gameplay loop goes beyond driving around in a space car. It's a third-person shooter that isn't necessarily well regarded for being the most refined experience in the world. There's definitely some extra refine in the remaster, but generally speaking the experience is for-like. The main thing is we never venture out without a squad, so we choose 2 of our squad mates to accompany us. They have different strengths and of course, we can boss them about on the battlefield. We have 2 command wheels, one allows us to order our squad to change weapons, the other allows us to order our squad to use particular abilities. And you do that while the gameplay still functions as a bog standard third-person shooter, except you don't have ammunition, instead you have an overheat. You need to prevent your weapon from overheating. If it does, you won't be able to fire it for a bit, but provided you keep it from overheating, you'll be fine. You can provide a constant rate of fire, and I suppose it's an interesting idea that maybe futuristic weapons wouldn't need ammo, but I find that more than anything it uninvents something and as a result discourages variation. All you do is find yourself a class of gun you like, find a good example of it, and you'll never have to swap weapons again. I found myself rarely using my pistol, my shotgun, or my sniper rifle. I just used a bloody good assault rifle and rather subconsciously called it a day. So if you see any variance in my footage, there were a few occasions where I consciously made the decision of trying to make my gameplay not look too boring. But beyond those 2 things, there isn't a lot to be said about this game's combat system. It doesn't necessarily feel imbalanced. It did feel a bit more imbalanced in the original version, so the remaster certainly tweaked that. But there is a cover system, your shots tend to land where they're aiming, you have grenades. I'm a big fan of the grenades, but it is reasonably static, old game combat. The biggest altering factor would be the class you choose, which used to dictate which weapons Commander Shepard could use, and Shepard's own abilities in the command wheel. The remaster, as far as Mass Effect 1 is concerned, changed it so only the latter is important. So if you go the soldier class, that appears to be the rounded default. If you want a more techie approach, there are classes that accommodate that. Or space magic. There are biotics in the Mass Effect universe, and essentially what a biotic is a person with the ability to create Mass Effect fields, using element 0 nodules embedded in body tissue. Imagine the Force from Star Wars, but with an attempt at a pseudo-scientific explanation, and you're pretty much halfway there. In my opinion, space magic is space magic. I have nothing against it, but I'm not under the illusion it isn't there to replicate magic. So there is a variety in classes, and those classes do dictate what Commander Shepard is capable of. So call me dull if you fancy, but I like the balance of the even-keeled soldier. If you need a biotic, pick a biotic to join you on the mission. Likewise, if you need tech expertise, that's available in your squad. The only other combat thing to mention is the Mako combat, which again has no ammunition. It just relies on overheating, which is a bit more common for vehicles in games, I find. And you have 2 weapons really, 3 if you're creative. You have a gun, you can fire rockets, and if you're feeling particularly clever, you can also run people over. The Mako's also a resilient machine. You don't have to pay too much mind to the damage you're taking in most scenarios. I think it's reasonable to say, despite its handling characteristics that appear to be inspired by wackiness itself, in combat situations the Mako makes life very easy. In fact, enemy rockets move so slowly through the air you can use the boosters in the Mako to jump over them. So I think it's unsurprising BioWare had to find a means to contrive Mako combat challenges into the game, and that is ultimately what Thresher Moors are there to do. They're just big angry worms that appear on a series of worlds that you can explore. There's no indicator as to when one's going to turn up, they're just kind of there regardless of if the planet could sustain life. I don't know how they get all over the galaxy like this, but they seem to exist purely so that when somebody passes by in a space rover, they can pounce, because, as you know, that's very likely on a barren planet. But I will give the Threshermoors this, they are explained in lore. There's more to this game than just the combat, you also have hacking, and it's an RPG, so there's an emphasis on finding better gear, weapons and armour. There's a rudimentary leveling system you can set to automatic and completely ignore. This applies to both Shepard and the squad mates. The one element you do have to pay attention to though is character consistency, manifesting in your Paragon and Renegade stats. These stats are bolstered by your decisions in dialogue. If you frequently select more Paragon options, you will access Paragon skill checks, and the same goes for Renegade. Unlike Mass Effect 2, however, where this system can undo your playthrough, Mass Effect 1 is slightly more forgiving with it. Across the entire game, there's maybe one skill check that might have consequences that overarch into Mass Effect 2 and 3, but you can easily bypass it by doing a little loyalty side objective for Rex. So if I'm being honest, I never worry too much about it in Mass Effect 1. But in principle, as you get to the back end of the game, the most interesting dialogue choices are locked behind these skill checks, meaning the game does to an extent reward you for making Commander Shepard consistent. As for how the game communicates what choices are Paragon or Renegade without highlighting them a specific colour identifying them as a skill check, your biggest tell is the positioning on the dialogue wheel. In the context of making a decision, if it's at the top of the wheel, it's Paragon, if it's at the bottom it's Renegade, and if it's in the middle, then it's neutral, which does have some value every so often. This, unless it's a skill check, rather consistently applies to the right-hand side of the dialogue wheel, and the left is typically tailored towards asking questions. It's cleverly set up to avoid confusion where confusion otherwise was a real risk. Does this mean the dialogue is entirely predictable? No. It's really hard in any game to convey the spirit of what's about to be said without spelling it out word for word, but the dialogue wheel being uniform gives you a general idea of what's going to be said, so it sort of cancels itself out. As for the hacking, that's typically for opening containers and the occasional door, and the minigame can best be described as Frogger but circle. The arrow sprite will bounce off orange obstacles, but will be reset if you strike a red one. But this doesn't mean you have to be attentive, the technique of simply pressing a stick works half the time. So you don't have to be especially cautious, a bit of timing and just sending it works a treat. And if you fail, you can always retry. And if you really can't be arsed, just break down some weapons you'll never use into Omnijail and smother the thing with it. It'll open just the same. And as far as I can tell, there's no other use for the stuff, it's purely a hacking bypassing currency. And that's kind of it for what there is to talk about gameplay-wise. It doesn't play in any way that I would deem special. The strength of Mass Effect 1 comes from other factors, but at the same time it plays passably, so who am I to complain? So, to return to the story, once we saved Liara from a force field she put herself in and recruited her, there are only actually a handful of main missions further. It is an RPG, there's incentive to go off and do other stuff and dilute the story across it, but at some point we've got to lock in and take the fight to Saren, while taking a few bollockings from the Council who object to how we get the job done. But, you know, you can drop the call on them every single time if you want. It's quite funny. Our first stop is a modest colony called Feros, and I have to say I love these orbital shots. I also really enjoy watching the Normandy come into land. There's no sentiment to follow it, I just enjoy the shots. They're good shots. They're there to break up the static interplanetary traversal and make you feel as if you're actually travelling between one destination and the next. It's nice. And as something that neither Mass Effect 2 nor 3 did, you can look out the window on the bridge and see that you are landed. From there, all you have to do is jump out the airlock, and we've arrived. It's nice. From here, it's apparent something is wrong in the colony on Feros. And I don't just say that because I get bad vibes, I say it because our greeting party is murdered by Geth. So we're immediately thrust into the action, and it seems Saren has interests here. He doesn't actually show up here, it would seem he's quite an absent antagonist, but we are taking the fight to his Geth forces at least. To cut a long story short, it's here where we learn the colonists of Zoo's Hope are being mind-controlled by a mysterious plant creature named the Thorian, and it seems Saren sought it out to understand the Prothean visions he's been getting. Its own existence overlapped with the Protheans, and contains a cipher that allows understanding of the Protheans, so it's valuable to both Shepard and Saren. It's furthermore interesting because it has mind control abilities. We'll hang on to that for later though. First we need to kill the thing. We do get the cipher we're after, albeit from an Asari commando, a follower of Matriarch Benezia held captive by the Thorian, and it's through her that we also learn more about Saren. It seems Benezia sought to guide Saren down a gentler path, but was ultimately swayed, as if Saren can somehow control minds. And that has something to do with his ship, Sovereign, that can somehow dominate the minds of Saren's followers. The process is referred to as indoctrination, an irreversible process that renders Saren's beliefs compelling. So we learn a very big detail here. Saren is in the possession of a warship with mind control capabilities, and he's in the pursuit of an ancient race of sentient machines that had the tendency to wipe out sentient spacefaring life. It makes sense, nobody sane would want that. But Saren isn't banking on the sanity of his followers. In theory, even the most steadfast minds can be swayed, like that of Matriarch Benezia. So in theory, these Reapers can return without anyone thinking it was a good idea. What I love about this is we are at the event horizon of a Lovecraftian mystery. Why is Saren looking to see the return of the Reapers? What does he get out of that? Also, how does Sovereign, Saren's warship, control people's minds and transform them into slaves? The game is building on the idea that Saren is not the true threat, an idea reinforced when we reach our next destination, Novaria, an icy wasteland known for its corporate discretion. There's a bit of back and forth to be had in this atmosphere. It's clear this is where corners get cut, but sure enough, this is where we can find Matriarch Benezia. But not before we're introduced to the Rachni, an insectoid race that's meant to be extinct. The last time they reared their ugly heads, they proved to be a monumental threat to the galaxy. So bad, in fact, the Krogan had to be uplifted from their nuclear wasteland of a planet to fight them. The revelation that they are not in fact wiped out is no doubt alarming, and Benezia is here to gain information from the Rachni Queen regarding the lost Mu relay. It's here where it's confirmed to us that Benezia is not a willing participant in Saren's pursuit, but rather an indoctrinated victim. We slap her and her friends up so hard that she's briefly broken from this mind control long enough to tell us that she'd sealed part of her mind away from the indoctrination, saving it for a time when it could help destroy Saren. In this passing window of clarity, she reinforces the idea that Saren's followers are indoctrinated, so much so that they in fact detach from themselves. Sovereign warps their minds so that Saren's machinations, however sinister, sound justified. The mystery becomes, what is this ship? Benezia confirms the Geth did not build it and its technology is way too advanced. Then she gives us the relay coordinates and we kill her in front of her daughter. We couldn't save Benezia, but there is one being we could save. The Rachni Queen. She communicates with us via a corpse, enabling us an insight into yet another culture. Even this late in the game, Mass Effect 1 wants to throw new things at us. Now we've got to decide the entire future of that culture. We could melt the Rachni Queen in acid and prevent any chance of there being a galaxy-wide catastrophe like there was in the days of old. Or we can take her at her word and believe her when she claims she has no intention of guiding the Rachni down that dark path. The squad mates we have with us will interchangeably advocate for one path or another, but the decision rests with us, to wipe the Rachni out for good, or free the Queen. There's no way of telling at this stage or even in this game if that was the right choice, but it all boils down to what feels like the right thing to do, and that isn't always clear. Saving the Queen is designated a Paragon action, and killing the Queen is designated Renegade. I think how these choices are framed tell us a lot about the morality system of Paragon and Renegade, and how good and evil aren't the point. We can choose to be ruthless and pragmatic, killing the Queen because it's the choice with the least risk, or we can spare the Queen, be idealistic, give her a chance. You can make a compelling argument for either decision, and committing to Paragon and Renegade earlier in the plot doesn't necessarily prepare you for the dilemma. Playing it safe and killing the Queen, however brutal that is, could still be appealing to a Paragon player. It's a test of resolve. Of course, when you've played the game about 600 times like I have, that within itself does fade, but I am still conscious of its purpose. This is a decision that will have a galaxy-wide impact either way. It requires careful consideration, and should your choice contravene what the Council would prefer, prepare for the vocal equivalent of a strongly worded email. This game's portrayal of bureaucracy, while fleeting, is pretty apt. Ashley and Liara then decide, only minutes after the former's mother's death, that now is the best time to figure out which one of them is getting piped by the skipper in the captain's cabin before we inevitably save the galaxy from cosmic horrors beyond our comprehension. Anyway, I'll leave the resolution of that up to your imagination. We have more pressing matters such as Vermire, Saren's base of operations, where after a brief Mako segment of slaughtering Geth, we rendezvous with a Solarian reconnaissance team that informs us that Saren has cured the genophage and is mass-producing an army of Krogan clones. No doubt that is conflicting news to Urdnot Rex. As cynical as he is, this is the first glimmer of hope for his people he's heard in a very long time. As such, he's not just willing to go along with us destroying the base, as Kirahi suggests. This potential conflict between Shepard's mission and one of Shepard's crewmates comes out of nowhere, and that is intentional. If you see it coming, you can prepare for it the first time and avoid a heartache. But if you don't see it coming, regardless of if you have prepared, you don't know, this scene is much more intense, and the consequences can be pretty rough. If you're underprepared and you don't have a particular bias between Paragon and Renegade, or you haven't done Rex's loyalty mission, there is every chance you could absolutely lose Rex here, and he dies, either by your hand or the unhesitant Ashley's. This is meant to be a punishing moment that transcends both Paragon and Renegade. Rex is our ally, we'll be down a powerhouse without him, and I feel it every time because I quite like having Rex in my squad. Being in a standoff with him, trying to convince him that Saren does not have the Krogan's best interest at heart and would enslave them if possible, is a moment that elevates the heart rate some. So as you can imagine, understanding the game, being prepared, and having done Rex's loyalty mission allowing you to talk him down is a very rewarding moment. Rex trusts us enough to follow us, even if Saren promises the cure of the genophage. Now, the Vermire mission is different still, because this time we aren't the only ones operating. We have a Solarian reconnaissance unit whose lives we are responsible for. We can help preserve their lives by sending either Ashley or Kaidan with them. The other squad mate will make the preparations to plant a nuclear bomb at the center of the facility so it can be blown to oblivion. Considering the stakes, that resort seems reasonable. The atmosphere on Vermire is more overtly intense. The previous missions allocated time to the establishment of atmosphere. There may be some early skirmishes, but the vast majority of combat is at the back end. Theros doesn't rush us to the realization that something is wrong, instead planting that seed through various things that don't add up as we help the colonists, that culminates in the realization that they're all under the influence of a giant plant. Novaria allocates time to exploring the nature of Novaria and the facilities on it. We're on deeply corporate territory. It's hostile, but not in a way a soldier is familiar with. Everyone's trying to screw each other over. There are no warm, affable, passing conversations like you'd expect on the Citadel. Everyone here has an ulterior motive, and they've come here because that's the agreement. Most people don't want to even talk to us. It lets us know that there might be nobody firing a gun at us yet, but we aren't welcome. It's clear the powers that be here don't want us to uncover the secrets housed on Novaria. As such, that's what we do over the course of tracking down Benezia. Even Theron, which I tend to do right away and don't actually have a right lot to talk about at all, even if it does drop us into the action pretty consistently and pretty early, allocates time to examining the remoteness of the planet in passing, which says a lot about just how old the Prothean ruins here are, and grants us further insight into Liara's solitary personality. Vermire dumps us into the action in the Mako before we know anything. Then after a brief sitrep from an amphibian, we're thrust back into battle. The scenery is bright, luscious, tropical even, existing in contrast to the Geth onslaught. There's not a lot to grab a hold of in the early throes. We have a series of objectives to help Kirahi and his men, so we're too busy paying mind to how we might assist him. But of course, this is intentional, because it all changes when we arrive at Saren's base. There's still plenty of skull cracking to go around, but the discoveries within are where the atmosphere comes from. We can discover indoctrinated Solarians imprisoned in cages, to varying degrees of mental disorder. The first is rambly and panicked, trying too hard to convince us he isn't indoctrinated. He doesn't do a good job at disguising that and reveals a harrowing truth. Awareness of the attempts to indoctrinate you are not ample protection. It seems Saren is studying the effects of indoctrination, which absolutely ties back to why he sought out a mind-controlling plant. He's keeping these Solarians cooped up. Some of their minds are completely gone, but one of them seems to have retained his sanity. We get a brief insight into the horrors of the indoctrination process. We also learn this Solarian commando envies those that died during the experiments. It seems more dignified somehow than being reduced to a husk. The victim's identity is typically entirely dismantled. They're a shell of themselves if they're useful, and if they're not, there's simply no self left. As we progress through the facility, we also discover Saren has been making husks, or at the very least studying them. It's interesting that he'd be curious to find out so much about things he's clearly been involved with for some time. You'd think he'd understand. But as we arrive at the heart of the base, that becomes very clear. We're granted access to a dark chamber by Saren's assistant, I suppose, Rana Thanoptis, and to be fair, maybe letting her go was an obvious mistake, but I always do it because I prefer the consequences from an overarching standpoint going into Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3, even if pragmatically it's less than ideal. Anyway, in this chamber we find yet another Prothean beacon, and Shepard interacts with it. Once again we're shown visions, and this time they are more complete than before. They're still disorienting, kinda messy, and it's hard to tell what every frame means, but the vision ends with the reveal of the visage of the Reapers, albeit swiftly. It's 1 or 2 frames, but it bears a striking resemblance to the ship we saw on Eden Prime, does it not? The conversation that follows is where everything becomes clear, as the ship itself shows up to have a conversation with us.
You are not Saren.
It speaks with a rich, deep synthetic apathy. It's apparent the ship itself is sentient. It isn't a depraved creation of the Geth, nor is it under the control of Saren. It's a Reaper. And its name, if you can even call it that, is Sovereign. The Reapers have, at least to some extent, been present already. This phantom we've been anxiously awaiting the return of is already here. Sovereign speaks with a vagueness that taps into a Lovecraftian mastery. It alludes to the intentions of the Reapers, but, much like trying to explain why you do things to an ant, it simply assumes we cannot understand its motives. And Mass Effect leans hard into the idea the Reapers are serving a function that we, as organics, as simple mortals who wither and die after a few decades, cannot understand. After all, you'd imagine there would be a knowledge disparity between a 30-year-old man and a sentient spacefaring metal crayfish that has lived for millions of years. We're facing an enemy that has succeeded where we now must bid to stop it countless times over. It would seem Sovereign's monologue's purpose isn't to tell us about the Reaper's nature and why they do what they do, but to brag. To sober us up to a sense of doom. We've received confirmation the Reapers exist. They're everything the rumors said they were, and they are far closer than we could possibly have imagined. We learn here that the Citadel and mass relays are not creations of the Protheans, but rather the Reapers. To engineer the pathways upon which spacefaring civilizations develop. To a point, they've been in control this entire time. The galaxy is a farm, and the Reapers are coming back to harvest. And the closest we get to an explanation for why is to impose order on the chaos of organic evolution. We have become so dependent on technologies the Reapers brought into existence that overcoming the Reapers at this point seems insurmountable. We can't fall back on the Protheans, they are nothing special after all. They, like us, discovered the very same technologies, and their disappearance was evidently the previous cycle of the harvest. So if Sovereign, the source of indoctrination, is in fact a Reaper, then it means Saren is not deploying mind control, the Reapers are. And that makes Saren's research into the effects of indoctrination just that bit more fascinating. Is he trying to protect himself? Or does he fear he too is indoctrinated? This is such a fantastic example of cosmic horror. Both because the game doesn't rush to introduce us to it, but rather eases us into it, only to completely flip this universe on its head with a big reveal. That homeliness the Mass Effect universe inherently possesses is now facing a colossal existential threat, and that didn't come out of nowhere. The hints have been right under our noses the entire time. The Citadel Tower map is even shaped a bit like a Reaper. This reveal is far from out of nowhere, it's woven into the very fabric of the world's construction, a consideration always. Sovereign's voice, cold and booming as he reveals the galaxy's infrastructure, was actually constructed by deep space murder droids, and now they've come back, is so fantastically overwhelmingly intimidating. This scene alone has so much implication, and it wants you to feel it. It conveys excellently who has the advantage. It's not us, it's not even Saren, it's Sovereign, the Reapers, and as soon as that's understood, the conversation ends. However, at the same time, this conversation provides a glimmer of hope. Sovereign didn't have to speak to us. In fact, in many ways, it doesn't make sense that it did. Why would you, a colossal sentient machine, with a mandate to wipe out all spacefaring life, waste time providing insight to those very lives you intend to harvest? Why would it bother to proclaim superiority? The answer seems to be hubris. The Reapers have carried out this very cycle so many times, dating back millions of years, that at this stage they approach their sadistic task with the arrogance that they cannot be stopped. There's plenty of apathy and implications of incomprehensibility, yet simultaneously they aren't entirely cold and flat. They're clearly inspired by H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos deities, in the sense that they are colossal uncaring extraterrestrial beings that have played their role for so long that they're rather confident that they will succeed until the end of time. But they differ from the idea of a chaotic force. They exist for a purpose and function according to a system. As synthetic beings, it's likely they were created at some point, and their objective is rather comprehensible. What isn't understood at this point is their motivations. Why? Later games dismantle that mystery to varying degrees of elegance, but the main distinction for the Reapers at this point is we know absolutely what they're after and we aren't just a casualty in their apathetic chaos. Our demise is part of the bigger picture, and Sovereign's just a tad too vain for that to seem like a foregone conclusion. Furthermore, we now have ammunition for our pending confrontation with Saren. Sovereign made it abundantly clear he has no place in the broader context of the Reaper's plans. They systemically bring organic life to an end. Saren is being manipulated. He's a victim too, and that's a tricky line to balance on. He's still every bit a menace, and as Anderson can outline for us in optional dialogue, not a great guy. But even by his own broken, sadistic standards, he's been led astray. The victim of Reaper indoctrination, suddenly his synthetic implants make sense. His own mind has been warped into believing he's doing the right thing, that he's serving the greater good. So much so that he believes he's in control of his own actions. But that's only what Sovereign wants him to believe. He believes he's in partnership with the Reapers, when the reality is he's a little more than a slave. He's aware of what the Reapers intend to do and believes they cannot be stopped, that joining them would save lives. But we know it would not. They use mind control to subjugate organics to further their own objectives and then complete the harvest anyway. What Saren proposes is impossible, foolish even. His mind has been molded by Sovereign to believe whatever's most convenient. In the words of Sovereign, you exist because we allow it, and you will end because we demand it. There is no coexistence, however unideal. Saren's thoughts are exposed for the clarity they lack. He is simply a tool, no grand architect. It would be very easy for him to lose all of his menace and presence in doing that. But he doesn't. His visage is still terrifying. The music still potently marks his presence, and his voice still chilling. He's a mindless fanatic. But his most dangerous characteristic going forward is his belief that he's somehow still in control. He seems to believe the more control Sovereign exerts, the less capable the subject becomes, and that keeps him from being fully indoctrinated, but whether intentional or otherwise confirms that he is indoctrinated, at least to an extent. The fallacy in Saren's logic is further exposed with how he describes Sovereign's view of the Geth. He tells us it is insulted by their worship. The Geth are but a tool, and no amount of belief on their part will change that. So there's a layer to Saren that knows there's no future for organics under the Reapers. The Geth are useful but will never be more than tools. There is absolutely no reason why Sovereign's view would change for organic life. We can make observations about Saren's indoctrination and bring that subconscious closer to the surface. And provided we've paid enough mind to Paragon or Renegade, we can plant doubts in his mind here. We can fracture the delusion, and even if only for a moment it seems to work. But of course, for the time being, it's not enough. He jumps on his hoverboard and green goblins around the place while we shoot at him. But that's not all there is to Saren. Up until a point, he's also right. There is no logic to fighting the Reapers. They've been carrying out this cycle countless times over. What makes us think will make a difference this time, aside from being a player character in a video game? Yep, fair point, that would do it. Victory against the Reapers seems highly unlikely, if not impossible. So in a way, Saren also exists to ask questions of the protagonist. His participation is understandable. He's motivated, like us, to preserve organic life. He, like us, understands the Reapers pose a significant threat to the galaxy, to put it lightly, and Saren too is trying to save lives. But his mind has been warped into believing relenting is the only option, whereas we know it's not an option at all. Suddenly, the major distinction between protagonist and antagonist is hopefulness versus hopelessness, and the price willing to be paid for success. Saren would sacrifice the very nature of galactic life to ensure the survival of spacefaring organics, but that won't preserve the mesmerizing galaxy we've spent the entire game getting acquainted with. That's ultimately the difference. That's why Mass Effect allocates so much time to ensuring we care about this fictional universe. Even before the Sovereign Bonanza, Anderson's previous run-ins with Saren proved he didn't have that very same connection. The best thing about Mass Effect's take on cosmic horror is the backdrop it threatens. Saren didn't necessarily care for that. He doesn't care to spare lives now. In his own words, his intentions are to save more lives than have ever existed. Our objective is to preserve the ones that do. Aside, of course, from anyone silly enough to pull a gun on us. Anyway, Vermire has one last lesson in store for us. Sacrifice. You can't portray the impending threat of a villain, never mind cosmic horrors from dark space, if everyone involved in the struggle makes it out in one piece. So ultimately, to hit home the stakes, at some point inevitably a character must pay the ultimate price. On Vermire, one of our squad mates will not be making it off the surface, a choice that exists independently from saving Rex, and because of how intense that moment can be, is what I like to refer to as a firm kick to the testicles. However, the options are limited to two of our squad mates. It's either Ashley Williams or Caden Alenko who are sacrificed. Our only two human squad mates, furthering the theme of humanity finding their place in the galaxy. Martyring oneself in the name of the galaxy's survival is one such way. That being said, choosing who to sacrifice should be way harder than it is. While neither character is particularly uninteresting, they aren't the ones that stand out. Like I said before, Caden's baggage has been squared away a long time ago. He's dependable and has lots to say about his past, but doesn't develop as Shepard interfaces with that. Ashley has something to cling to. She has prejudiced attitudes towards aliens, a perspective that exists to be challenged. There's room in her character to develop. Something that would be more interesting to see the shift in going forward. So as I said earlier, it's a bit too easy to hand Caden the short end of the stick. Not because he's less likable, but because he's less interesting. He's a reliable constant that doesn't need to develop. He could die here without any consequence, but in Ashley's case, she's got that bit compelling her to clear her family name. The sacrifice here would do that, but it's too easy to deny her martyrdom. Players start to factor other considerations, and both characters are more than willing to go down fighting. So you start looking at the practical value, maybe even the gender distribution in your squad, or simply whichever character you like having around more. To make this choice hit harder, both characters should have both had a reason for this to culminate their arcs, and both characters could have also done with a reason to survive. If they survive, it becomes something to explore, and if they die, it becomes a testament to the sacrifice. The emotional impact either way is negligible. We're in orbit by the time the bomb actually goes off. And then aside from passing survivor's guilt in the crewmate that lived, it's dealt with in a very clean way that could have been a lot more interesting. But to an extent I get it. The mission comes first. We know that Saren is seeking the Conduit so that the Reapers can return. Having interacted with another Prothean beacon, Liara thinks we can finally make sense of Shepard's vision. So we do the melding thing again. This time the visions are at points clearer. It's the decimation of the Protheans, culminating in the easier to spot revelation that Reapers look like Reapers. From this, Liara somehow deduces that the Conduit we are seeking is on the planet Ilos. So the mission is clear. We'll need to go to Ilos. After all, that's where we'll next find Saren. I think Tali fails to realise it's a bit late in the game for reservations based on lore, so we must prepare ourselves for one last huzzah. However, before we can do that, the Council want us to return to the Citadel, where we expect they're finally ready to send a fleet after Saren, only for them to once again misunderstand the threat and ground us. I wish I could say this was the most foolish and inconsistent the Council gets in the Mass Effect Trilogy, but that does get so much worse in Mass Effect 2. Even though it was them that prompted us to find out more about the Reapers, they don't believe the Reapers exist, and still hold the belief that Saren is the mastermind. Even Ambassador Udina agrees with them. The idea of impending doom is too inconvenient, I suppose. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely see what they're getting at here. I just think they probably could have found a way to do this without making the Council seem like a troop of fucking idiots. Fear not, friends, this contrived obstacle won't stick around for long because we have one ally on the Citadel. Keith David. Captain Anderson has us meet up with him in the casino Flux. I had no idea he was so into gambling, but he does help us come up with a plan to get out of here. There are two options, one of which culminates with Anderson being arrested, the other results in Udina being punched squarely in the mouth, so as you can imagine that was the winner. With that out the way, we can bugger off and save the galaxy. Props for this Normandy flypast shot on the way off the Citadel. It's a great reminder of what we're fighting for at this crucial moment. Now, to Ilos. I have absolutely nothing to say about the romance scene, by the way. The romance options are very limited in this game, so there are only so many variations to see. Otherwise, for a niche portion of the fanbase, it fulfills a fantasy, but eventually the focus does turn back to the annihilation of all spacefaring species in the Milky Way galaxy. We arrive at Ilos to find Geth ships in orbit, confirming we are in the right place, so for the only time in the plot we activate the stealth systems on our state-of-the-art stealth warship so we can try and drop the Mako on Saren's head. But of course that would be too easy if not a tad anticlimactic, meaning we'll have to resort to the usual approach of fighting through various layers of Geth, and it has to be said the environment of Ilos is enthralling. We are disturbing yet more Prothean ruins, and it's apparent how old they are through just how thoroughly nature has reclaimed them. It's here where we finally see statues that presumably portray the Protheans. Funnily enough, the Protheans do get portrayed in Mass Effect 3 and they look nothing like this, and that game retcons them as actually statues of a previous race, but that wasn't the intention in Mass Effect 1. In Mass Effect 1, they were the Protheans. It's never explicitly stated to be the case, but there comes a point where it just confuses the point. And while I could talk about yet another intense showdown with the Geth, that's not what wows me the most about Ilos. In fact, anyone who's played Mass Effect 1 knows exactly where I'm going with this. As we get deeper inside the ancient facility, having been reunited with our space car, we enter a chamber that appears to be full of stasis pods, as perhaps one of the most beautiful numbers I've ever heard in a game envelops our ears. The facility is huge and appeared to hold Prothean survivors. One could only marvel at the secrets we might uncover had only one survived. But it's confirmed to us there are no life signs in the pods. However, all is not lost. As we push on, we're eventually halted by a force field, forcing us to get out of the Mako and walk down a side tunnel, then take a lift, at the bottom of which we meet an intact Prothean VI called Vigil, with whom we can converse. It claims that, unlike the other who came through here, we do not possess the hallmarks of indoctrination. It reveals to us some fascinating things. The Protheans were in fact wiped out by the Reapers. This was their last refuge, spared only because of its secrecy. More importantly, we learn about what the Conduit is and why it's so crucial. It's a mass relay that interfaces with a similar mass relay within the Citadel, meaning if the Geth and Saren arrive at the Conduit, they can get inside the Citadel instantaneously and make preparations from within for Sovereign's arrival, at which point Sovereign will bring back the rest of the Reapers, decimating the galaxy from the seat of government outwards. No wonder they're so devastating. They strike hard, swift, and capitalize on confusion. We learn they also created the Keepers, the species of benign organic caretakers that exist solely to maintain the Citadel. So while the Council thinks patrolling the mass relays will do it, Sovereign is planning a surprise attack from within, so perhaps if we just accepted the benching, at least we would be there. Anyway, from this point we learn how the Reapers further isolate civilizations, taking control of mass relays to cut off communication and transportation. The ascension to being able to cross the galaxy is taken away. The very concepts spacefaring civilizations are built upon are no longer available to them and used against them. They are reintroduced to the mind-boggling vastness of space and then world by world annihilated, all without a shred of mercy. What an utterly terrifying extinction for a spacefaring civilization, for the rug of technological advancement to be ripped out from under you, stranding you wherever you stand, to helplessly anticipate the arrival of massive godlike synthetic spaceships that exist for the sole purpose of ending you. And then, once the killing is done, they simply disappear back into dark space, having harvested the masses and leaving their indoctrinated slaves, now devoid of any direction to wither and die. A horrifying fate we are frighteningly close to sharing. Just like with us, why the Reapers do this is a mystery to Vigil. But as the Ball of Light confirms to us, our survival does not depend on understanding them, but stopping them. There is so much more to unpack with Vigil, but if I wanted to do it all, we would be here all day. We know what we need to do now. We need to reach the Conduit to get to the Citadel to stop Saren from aiding Sovereign from within, and save the Citadel from the Reaper invasion before it's even begun. But I can't move off of this moment without conveying precisely why I love it. It's a moment of calm. It's a relaxing conversation with an ancient computer that possesses knowledge we cannot possibly hope to obtain any other way. We are actively uncorking the bottle of mysteries in the galaxy, and as a result learn so much about how it actually was, or is, that exists in contrast to what the vast majority of characters within it believe. Vigil on its own is an entire layer of Mass Effect lore that you cannot access from the surface level, but the surface level is so compelling you yearn to know. So while we're in a race against time to get to the Conduit, to reach Saren, to save the galaxy, it's also very easy to lose a quarter of an hour talking to this cluster of light, expiring its dialogue and learning about everything it has to say. One of the most fascinating is the implication the only reason we've made it this far is because of luck. The Reaper's typical method didn't work by some miracle, and Sovereign is deviating from the norm. So once again, a glimmer of hope enters the conversation. We aren't special, but at least we know the Reapers can be inconvenienced. If they can be inconvenienced, they can be moved. If they can be moved, they can be beaten, hopefully. This time around, Sovereign has utilised its incomprehensibility to amass at least one follower it can indoctrinate and then spiral out from there, because it's not invincible and on its own it could be destroyed. Geth and Saren aside, the other Reapers aren't here. Sovereign is on its own. I also like the implication from Vigil that Saren was unlikely to be the first pawn Sovereign cultivated. Vigil also highlights that Sovereign is bold and perhaps even desperate. This fading speck of technology from a long since extinct society is a glimmer of hope, and that makes this scene warm, like an embrace from the past. It's up to us, of course, if we probe it for more information, but its answers are entirely confined to the Reaper invasion. Nevertheless, the first time we try to leave dialogue, we'll be prompted to sap it of all the knowledge it has. For the best understanding possible, the game itself wants us to linger here. And in fairness, every time I play this game, I can't not hear everything Vigil has to say. But at some point, you have to crack on. From here, we barrel our way to the Conduit, battling through Geth forces, culminating in the act of driving into a mass relay and launching ourselves at the Citadel in the Mako. It's kind of funny when you think about it. Of course, we smash into the Presidium, making sense of the mass relay statue we can see in this area earlier in the game, and as you can imagine, it's a very different environment to the one we're familiar with now. It's dark, and every other thing is on fire. There are husks running rampant, and Davina is distorted and malfunctioning. It's a complete contrast to the bright, airy, sterile, noticeably not on fire, perfectly functioning Citadel Presidium we're introduced to earlier in the game. The galaxy is about to be turned completely upside down. The seat of government is under attack, and nobody is safe. I'd love to take a moment to talk about just how impressive the cutscenes are in this game. When it comes to portraying colossal objects in space, we know from pretty early on Mass Effect 1 has that covered, but we get to bear witness to the beginning of Sovereign's attack on the Citadel. It's taking fire to limited effect, and if any ship is in its way, it just smashes clean through without the slightest alteration of course. The mercilessness of the Reapers is on full display as Sovereign passes through the Citadel's arms as they close. Every single shot here is a wonder. This space station city has become a cocoon. We know Sovereign is massive, but the Citadel dwarfs it. Mass Effect 1's portrayal of scale once again comes to the fore. As for Saren, he's up at the Citadel tower, and naturally using the lift would be too easy, so it halts partway up. So Shepard busts out the window, and we head outside. This is one of my favourite shots in the game, not because of the visuals necessarily, but because of the gravity switch. After all, it's artificial gravity, so we just walk up the side of the Citadel tower. What a fabulous idea that plays into the notion that we aren't on a planet but a space station. Gravity just bent and now we're walking up the side of a building towards a massive Reaper. Fighting our way through yet more Geth to make use of the environment more than anything. But because it's such a cool idea, I have no problem lingering in it to do some battle. Naturally, however, all good things come to a close, and this one does rather swiftly. But it's just a testament to how Mass Effect 1 throws new ideas at you, left, right and centre. It makes up for some of its more generic environments. Nevertheless, the time swiftly comes for our final confrontation with Saren at the Citadel Tower. Once again, we witness where the Council meets, completely upturned. It shouldn't be too much of a surprise that this would be the scene of the final boss fight, however. The location's map is shaped like a Reaper and it's full of enough cover spots to raise the eyebrows of those who know a thing or two about level design. That doesn't include me. Anyway, in our final confrontation with Saren, he reveals that Sovereign has upgraded him. Sensing his wavering commitment, Sovereign ensured that Saren would be more committed than ever. It's alarming how the indoctrinated don't know when their indoctrination is so obvious. But fortunately, that nugget of information gives us an in. To avoid fighting Saren here, all we have to do is convince him that he has in fact been indoctrinated, and he doesn't really want this. Of course, if you want a showdown with an avian equivalent to the Green Goblin, there's nothing stopping you. But I find the most fitting end for Saren is convincing him that he's indoctrinated. You can only do this if your charm and intimidate stats are high enough, and this decision I suppose is the culmination of that system. Its ramifications aren't as vast as saving Rex, but I like that we can give this misguided soldier one opportunity to regain control, even if only briefly, and finally do what he believes he's doing. The right thing. It isn't redemption, and Saren is not a good guy deep down. Anderson and Rex tell us otherwise, but Saren's true self does not want the harvest. He doesn't want the Reapers to return. He might not value individual lives, but he doesn't want life itself to cease. Shepard's words are cutting through his programming and bringing the true Saren's doubts to the surface. It won't save him. Reaper indoctrination is permanent, but a moment of clarity is all he needs to give Sovereign a flick on the nose. So sure enough, he takes control and spends his final moments wisely, choosing to go out on his own terms rather than Sovereign's, giving Shepard the opportunity to stop the Reaper invasion before it's even truly begun. His lifeless body falling in slow motion for dramatic effect, leaving us to open up the Citadel's arms and allow the Alliance in to destroy Sovereign. But before we can do that, we have a choice. And I have some things to say about this choice, that it isn't necessarily fair to direct at Mass Effect 1, because it's what Mass Effect 2 and 3 do with it that makes it so frustrating, but that choice is functionally to save the Council aboard the Destiny Ascension. Doing so would cost human lives, but at the same time, the Council hasn't believed us at any step across our journey. They've scrutinized our every action, and they ultimately do stand in the way of humanity's progress. As such, both renegade and neutral choices are to allow the Council to die. The Paragon choice, however, is to save them, demonstrating that humanity has the capacity for selflessness, that we belong, and deserve a seat at the table, because without us, there would be no table. The satisfaction of that is tempting, but at the same time, leaving the Council to reap the consequences of their own inaction is also tempting. I typically choose to save the Council because, in my view, it's the ultimate olive branch. There's no way they'll not take us seriously going forwards, right?
Ah yes, Reapers!
I'll talk more about that when I get round to doing my Mass Effect 2 video, but I get the sense the game wanted us to let the Council die, but gave us the choice anyway. But here the choice does alter the ending somewhat, so it's still valuable. As you can see, the Citadel has become the scene of one giant space battle. And you could tell that somebody at BioWare was cooking that week, because every shot is just marvellous. Obviously, the overall visual aspect has been enhanced by the remaster, but the shots retain the same essence, and it's ultimately that essence that makes it so good. And that brings us to the you thought you'd bypassed the final boss moment, in which Sovereign assumes control of Saren's implants, transforming his lifeless body into a horrifying monster. The Turian Spectre is no more, but that doesn't end Sovereign's influence over his physical form. He's something way more disturbed now, an abomination that amplifies Saren's most terrifying aspects and removes them from anything relatable. Okay, this is a proxy boss fight, considering we can't actually fight a Reaper. The thing is huge, so instead we fight it via Saren's tattered remains. And I think that's a good compromise. The game needs to take the fight to Sovereign physically, so the player feels involved in the victory that's pending. Convincing Saren to top himself allows us to bypass a fight, but it doesn't allow us to bypass the final boss, Sovereign, using Saren's body as some depraved puppet. The boss fight itself is kind of buggy and can up and break the game, but I love the implications that confirms we were right. Saren was indoctrinated. In fact, there was a husk-like cyborg underneath his skin this entire time, slowly but surely being assembled with various upgrades, finally waiting beneath the surface for the time to come to bust out and become a mindless slave. It's a terrifying thought that even in death, you aren't safe from the Reapers. It is a bit strange that Sovereign would allocate so much resources to fighting 3 people on the Citadel while also taking heavy fire right outside the window, but I think in storytelling sense sometimes does have to make way for ceremony. And it isn't like we're entirely unthreatening. It also seems like a major risk for Sovereign to transfer its consciousness to Saren's body, which does appear to be the case because upon being reanimated, Saren's first words are, "I am Sovereign." The reason I say this is weird is because deactivating this abomination is way easier than deactivating the massive Reaper spaceship outside. Doing so seems to stun Sovereign, forcing it to detach from the Citadel tower. Itself created that vulnerability, giving Joker and the Normandy crew the opportunity to piss missile the thing into oblivion. I'm not saying it's an unsatisfying solution, but it has to bypass a few layers of the cosmic horror to work. As for the actual ending of Mass Effect 1, that I find to be a bit strange too. Firstly, it has this fake-out death scene for Commander Shepard. There's nothing innately wrong with it, it's just to demonstrate how close a call this was. But all the characters believing Commander Shepard is dead for a moment only for Shepard to appear from the rubble is a very predictable trope. I only mention it because it happens way too much in the Mass Effect Trilogy and it's going to get more ridiculous. Here, however, it serves its function. The point is, Shepard and the crew of the Normandy won, but only just. And as the following scene with the Council highlights, this has only delayed the inevitable. The Reaper invasion is coming. But more importantly for the confines of this chapter of the story, humanity has found their place in the galaxy. The Council recognizes their efforts to save their lives and offers us a seat on the Council. It is ultimately what the Alliance has been striving for the entire game. Who becomes the first human councillor is up to us. We can choose between 2 individuals, Ambassador Udina or Captain Anderson, and I wish there was an argument you could make for Udina, the only one being he's a career politician. Otherwise, all he's proven is he's sleazy, underhanded, and a bit of a knob. So in my mind, it's way too easy to choose Anderson. After all, not only did he punch said knob in the face, it was the most consequential right hook in Galactic history. He's perfect for the job, not because he's a politician, but he has no problem chinning politicians. He's also a soldier, and with a war with the Reapers inevitably coming, he's the kind of character you'll want to have some sway when they arrive. Beyond that, this ending is a declaration the war with the Reapers hasn't even begun. Never mind having it be over already. Sovereign was but a vanguard. So while Anderson makes a resounding speech about that, Shepard walks away to continue the mission. It's really funny watching the protagonist walk away in the background while Anderson's saying these hard-hitting, motivating lines that get your blood pumping for the next game, but the effect lasts. The galaxy must stand together if we have a hope in hell at stopping the Reapers. Anything less will mean certain doom. But if Sovereign's proved anything, it's that it's doable. And then we get the dumbest final shot of Commander Shepard standing in space! And then the credits begin with the Normandy flying away into space, which is a mesmerizing shot, by the way, marking that the game is now in fact over.
It's a good ending, all things considered. Don't get me wrong, the narrative, especially towards the back end, has its ridiculous moments, but they can't subtract from the greatness. The amazing cosmic horror, the fantastic world building, the relevance of the world building, the sense of adventure captured in the race against time to stop Saren, the visual design, the sound design, they all come together. So what makes Mass Effect 1 so special boils down to how complete this fictional universe feels. More or less every detail comes together to sell you a feeling. Whether it's the warmth of galactic society aboard the Citadel, or the hard-hitting loneliness of the cosmos as you stand on a barren alien world and gaze upon an impossible horizon. Even being on the moon and looking at Earth, a blue dot against an endless sea of black, feeds into the scratching idea of cosmic insignificance. The genius of the Reapers as a concept for an antagonist is they pair those conflicting things together, bringing the dark, uncaring, lonely reality of space forward as a threat to that warm, welcoming galactic society. We care about that immersive, beating heart of the universe, so we care about stopping the Reapers. This blend shouldn't work, but it's brought together so well that you can't help but feel it. Mass Effect 1 then is special, not because it's the best game ever made, it most certainly is not that, but because as far as fictional universes go, it's comprehensive in a way that's encompassing. It isn't content to let us sit on the ideas introduced in the first hour. At no point does the well of what there is to know about this universe dry up. There's always a new concept to learn about, a new star system to explore, a new spectacular way in which the Mako defies the laws of physics to spite you. And the result is this small 2007 game feels incomprehensibly massive, like there's always something new to find, something extra to ponder over. What makes Mass Effect 1 my favourite of the Mass Effect trilogy these days is the fact that this is the game where that feels the most novel. That doesn't absolve it of its weaknesses. What it does do, however, is feel whole. It is trying to capture a multitude of feelings, and more often than not, in my opinion, it succeeds. And while the sequels don't lack for that necessarily, both Mass Effect 2 and 3 are more similar to each other, and very different from this. In some ways they are better, in others they're worse. But when it comes down to it, a franchise couldn't dream of a better opening argument than Mass Effect 1. And that is why, no matter how many times I've played this game before, no matter how old I get, I keep coming back to it. With that, I bring this video to its conclusion. Thank you all for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to go ahead, leave a like, subscribe, maybe share the channel with your friends, all that wonderful stuff. It would be massively appreciated. And if you fancy joining our Discord server, follow the QR code on screen now. You're more than welcome if you can put up with my rambling for this length of time. It's a relatively small community, and everyone's really nice. So if you're down for that, be sure to follow the QR code. Jump on in. Now, I don't have any more admin to say. The only thing I can really think to talk about beside that is how long it'll be before I'll get the Mass Effect 2 video out, and honestly, I don't know. All I know is it'll be better than the last attempt I made, but with any luck I'll be seeing you all very soon with another video at some point, but until next time, please take care, and goodbye.